Hello and welcome to a long overdue return back to our Demolishing the To-Be-Read pile, where I am going through, or trying to go through, all the unread books on my shelves at the moment. This is for the month of April, so I have gone up Goodreads. I'm keeping a note of what I've read on there. So let's go through the books I've read in April and see what my thoughts are on them. First up in April seems to have been Jeff Loeb's and Tim Sale's gallery edition of Spider-Man Blue, even though it doesn't say blue on the front cover for some reason. It is known as Spider-Man Blue. The artist edition itself, the dimensions and everything are wonderful. Oversized edition, and great for Tim Sale artwork to be in that oversized format. I love it. The borders on these editions I don't like. They do distract, and so I wish they could have found another way to get that oversized dimensions without having that weird structure of the page. But either way, it is to your own personal taste. I won't be buying any more of these gallery editions because of that one element, to be fair. The story itself, though, is solid. There's nothing really drastically groundbreaking and mind-blowing about it, but it is a story with a lot of heart and a lot of kind of emotion behind everything. And yes, it goes through basically Spider-Man reminiscing about his lost love and the past and everything like that, and the artwork is just glorious by Tim Sale. It really is absolutely stunning. But it's a solid tale of kind of love and loss and how you move forward and what you do with those memories and how you grow as a person with Spider-Man at the heart. And so, yeah, there's nothing to dislike about it, I don't think. I followed that straight on with more Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale in Absolute Superman for All Seasons. This, in terms of production quality, is one of the best books I've ever owned. Why is because the absolute format for a start is stunning. The size and the thickness of them for the most part is spot on. It's not overly heavy like a very bulky omnibus, though there are some like Jack Kirby's Fourth World and things like that are extremely bulky. This isn't that. It collects Superman for All Seasons and a couple of extra bits. Initially it was a 4-issue run, and it's looking at different aspects of Superman's kind of life. It's looking back in his early life, and like Spider-Man Blue, this story is never going to be that runaway, this is my favourite story ever, but there's nothing really to hate about it. It doesn't outstay its welcome. Every panel is really pretty and really great. Every kind of story bit is fine. There's no really amazing conceptual ideas going on. It's all straightforward, solid comics, to be fair. The Absolute itself has got a cloth-bound cover on the slipcase. It's got cloth-bound kind of cover on the book itself. It's really, really well put together. It's a beautiful kind of feel and texture and design and art aesthetic. Honestly, praise to the people who designed it, because it is a beautiful Absolute. One of my absolute favourites. Pun, not a pun, wording meant. Then we go on to Mordcinder by Hector German Osterheld, and crucially, the artist here, which I got a feeling is the only reason this edition was reprinted and reintroduced to the world, and that's Alberto Breccia. Now, Alberto Breccia, his art is what first dragged me into this. I had looked at Osterheld's work and have a few books of his work already. The Eternaut, Shea, and a few others. But this, I wasn't interested in the writing at all, really. It was the art that really captured my attention. The art in this book is outstanding on every level. If you want some Albert Breccia artwork that really sums him up and really displays the quality of his art, this is the book. It's published by Fantagraphics. I got it ages ago, and it took me ages to fully read from start to end, because I started it a couple of times. And the story-wise of the start, starts off really interesting, and then it kind of tails off because it takes a long time to get to the point of that first story arc. It really drags the story arc out with a lot of internal monologuing and dialogue. But the art is really what kind of keeps it going and keeps it firing on all cylinders. The story, I do feel, is way dragged out, and it doesn't necessarily get to the bits that I found most interesting until way later, because this character of Mordcinder is a character that has been on the earth for many, many hundreds of years, and you were coming back to him. This guy who owns an antique shop is basically kind of part of his new resurrection, and they have adventures together. But then the beauty is when you go back in time to Mortzinder in the historical context. So when you see him in, you know, various historical moments in the past, that's for me when it really started to get a bit more science fiction, a bit more fantasy, a bit more interesting. The initial story arc starts off really strong, but then again, just drags out that little bit too long, and it's not until kind of like halfway through the book that it captures that pace again. But the art is just phenomenal. It's mental how good it is. And again, it's almost like a 4 or 5 star book just on the art alone, I think. Then we get to BPRD Volume 10, the Omnibus Volume 10. I have gone through all 10 omnibuses, and if you watched previous videos, you would know that I was absolutely loving them from start to finish, really, and this didn't change at the end. The end was everything that I would want. Now, ending a series is always going to be a bit dicey when you've had a long form series like BPRD, and there's a lot of expectations. But what I always like is how they kind of don't necessarily do what's predicted, but they subvert it and change the direction of things, and certain characters kind of, you know, get lost by the wayside and pass away, and certain characters come back and push their way forward. I can't obviously talk too much about the details of this omnibus, but for me, it wrapped everything up nicely. It had a lot of callbacks to the Hellboy series and earlier events. It had a lot of rewarding for fans, but equally, I don't necessarily think if you were to read this as your first introduction to the Hellboy universe, the BPRD series overall, it wouldn't matter if you didn't have all that other stuff as well, because again, you'll get that same feeling when you read the other stuff, if you do get to it, if you get my meaning. So if you go from this to Hellboy, you'll have that same familiar kind of feeling and introduction to the connecting dots of the world. But yeah, it rounded out this kind of extremely post-apocalyptic story that the BPRD has been crafting for thousands of pages, and yeah, I very much enjoyed it. There was nothing that I disliked about it at all, really. Then I continued with Master Keaton, the Naoki Urasawa, and Hokushi Katsuhita. I'm crap at pronouncing. Oh yeah, and Takahashi Nagasaki as well. There's a few creators on this series. At some point in the volumes, Naoki Urasawa takes over everything, including writing, but initially he's just kind of focusing on the art, even though he probably did have a big input on the story. Master Keaton, if you watched any of the earlier videos or seen Master Keaton before, is following an insurance investigator who's a very intelligent, talented guy. He's an ex-SAS officer, and you know, he's skilled in, you know, survival techniques and combat techniques, and he's a great investigator and things like that. So he gets called in to help on certain problems, but then equally you delve into his personal life a lot. So it's quite episodic. It feels very TV friendly, the story, you know, it has got that very episodic beat to it. There isn't really a massively overarching story at all, unless you consider him and his family as this overarching story, but even that is quite thin. You just there to get these little snippets of him coming into a new group of people, investigating their problem, solving it or not solving it, or something happening, and then moving on. It is quite like, you know, Saturday evening, early evening, you know, detective show, like blooming Bergerac or Lovejoy, which for people in Britain will understand, but probably no one outside won't. But it is very much kind of, well, even like MacGyver, it's kind of like that, you know, he's always got a way of getting out of the problem. And it's nice. The artwork is really solid because it's Naoki Urasawa. Some stories are way better than others, but these 2 volumes didn't really kind of, you know, put me off in any way. My main problem with the series is having that driving force through, because there's about 12 volumes overall, and because there isn't that massive overarching story, because there isn't that big push, there's nothing really driving you with speed and rapidity to pick up that next volume. It all feels like I can just pick it up whenever I like, so it breeds a bit of complacency, I think, in reading. But either way, there's nothing wrong with it at all, apart from, you know, having that ambitious story arc. But again, it is what it is. There's got to be some books that are kind of, you know, straightforward, episodic, fair, and some that are going to be that epic storytelling. And this certainly is that more small-scale, episodic storytelling that you can pick up, dip in and out of randomly, I think. Next, book 9 of Tintin, The Crab with the Golden Claws. It's nice to get a Tintin book that doesn't have, you know, a really horrible image of, you know, a black or ethnic minority to annoy me. Because I can't lie, it does really annoy me when I'm kind of been reading these all through with my daughter, and we read through them, and it's kind of embarrassed. I get embarrassed for the book itself when these characters pop up, and you know what I mean. I'm not going to show pictures of it, but either way, there are some very questionable kind of stereotypical racist kind of characters in these books, and they are very much fly in the ointments. But Crab with the Golden Claws is pretty basic and pretty straightforward, and it is fun, and I do manage most of the time to put away my kind of personal feelings about certain depictions of people and manage to enjoy these adventure tales, which is fundamentally what they are. They're really fast and quick paced and chaotic, and they are quite repetitive in terms of story layout, because, you know, certain characters will always do certain things, like Snowy will always be chasing like a cat or a bone or get in trouble, and then that'll lead to something else. Tintin will always do Tintin things, you know, try and blast into things and get beat up or get knocked on the head. Captain Haddock will invariably turn into an alcoholic at some point. The Thompson twins will invariably be clumsy and chaotic. But if memory serves, this is our kind of introduction to the Captain Haddock character, and from here on in he kind of becomes a stalwart of the series. I might be remembering that wrong, but I'm sure it's his first introduction in the desert and him struggling with alcoholism, which is supposed to be funny, but when you really think of it, you're like, this is quite dark, and you know, but either way, it is what it is. Next, Life of Shay by Hector German Osterheld, and artwork by Albert Breccia and his son, who his name has gone out of my head now, Enrique Breccia. Now, impressionistic art and all that kind of tries to capture an emotion and feeling of the scene. It's not going for realism. It's not going for, you know, hyper realistic, you know, ideas of the scene in front of them. And this book very much is that. It's trying to capture the essence of what Che Guevara was and how his life panned out, and it's trying to capture the feeling of life moments throughout his time and stuff like that, and it does a great job of that. It's not an exhaustive biography by any chance, but certainly by the end of it you get a feel for what type of human being he was and what he was going for. So the book itself kind of just cherry picks what it thinks are the most kind of pivotal moments in Che Guevara's story. The art, though, is very kind of abstract and out there in some places, and very hard to read in certain places, purposefully so. It's starkly black and white, and some of the imagery and some of the way the characters are drawn will force you to kind of look at the panels for longer and things like that. It isn't this exhaustive biography that you might think it is picking it up. It was released not long after he actually died and was quite a controversial book at the time, but luckily Fantagraphics and other people picked it up and republished it many years later and translated it to English. With the introduction of Breccia's son, the artwork really kind of changes. So Mort Cinder is kind of this one art style, but the both Breccias really craft a totally different art style than you would have got from Mort Cinder. And if you want more of Osterheld's work and Breccia's work, then it's certainly worth a buy, because again, it's a solid book. It's not quite to my tastes fully, and that's because the art is quite erratic in places. It is beautiful in places, but it's not beautiful in places, and it hasn't got that flow in the writing, because there's quite sparse pages, but then there's very dense pages. And now and again I'm fine with that type of styling, where it's just this big exposition dump and then very image heavy pages or after. But for this, it felt a bit kind of jittery when you're reading it, because you'd spend long times on certain pages, and then other pages you'd flip by quickly, and other pages you'd be looking at for a while trying to figure out the form that you were looking at and the idea of the scene that you were looking at, because it's quite chaotic. It's certainly worth a read if you are interested in that type of thing, I think. And that was the last book I read in April. I think it was even the 1st of May that I finished that, but I jumped that into this month just to finish it out more than anything. But I will be back in the next video to talk about all the books I read in May. So thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.